A wealthy man's hands trembled as he held a tiny pink bundle near the dark lake. His face twisted in anger. A girl, useless. Without a moment's pause, he hurled his newborn daughter into the icy water and walked away. What he didn't notice was the couple hidden in the shadows, already rushing to rescue her. Before watching the full story, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. The night was cold, rain pouring down from the pitch-black sky as Richard Miller drove his luxury car along the deserted road beside Silver Lake. His face was emotionless, marked only by grim determination. His hands, wrapped in expensive leather gloves, gripped the steering wheel firmly. In the back seat, wrapped tightly in a soft pink blanket, lay his newborn daughter, only 3 days old. A girl, he muttered with bitterness. All this waiting for a girl. Richard had spent years building his empire. Miller Enterprises towered over the city skyline, a monument to his cutthroat ambition. He had always dreamed of a son, an heir who would inherit his legacy, someone to carry on the Miller name. But when his wife, Sarah, gave birth to a daughter, something inside him shattered. "We can try again next year," Sarah had whispered weakly from her hospital bed, reading the disappointment in his eyes. But Richard couldn't wait. In his twisted thinking, this child was nothing more than a mistake he needed to fix. Sarah, still in the hospital recovering, had no idea what he intended to do that night. Pulling up beside the lake, Richard stepped into the pouring rain. He opened the back door and lifted the fragile bundle. For a brief second, the baby opened her deep blue eyes, eyes that seemed to peer directly into his soul. She didn't cry. She only looked at him, curious and calm. Richard froze, his grip loosening for a moment. But then, hardening his heart, he turned cold. With one sharp motion, he tossed her into the dark waters of Silver Lake. The bundle disappeared beneath the ripples. He didn't look back. Climbing back into his car, he drove away as the windshield wipers swept away any trace of what he had done. "It's over," he muttered to himself. "Now we can try again. For a real heir." What Richard failed to notice was the young couple, Mary and David Walker, who had been taking shelter from the rain beneath a nearby bridge with his wife Mary, had seen everything. "Oh my God," Mary gasped, already sprinting toward the lake. David moved faster, diving into the freezing water without a second thought. Every second felt like an eternity as Mary stood anxiously at the edge, silently begging for a miracle. Then finally, David's head broke through the surface. One arm paddled to keep himself afloat, while the other cradled the tiny pink bundle. "She's alive!" he shouted, swimming hard toward the shore. Mary rushed to meet him, immediately pulling the soaked blanket off and wrapping the baby tightly in her own coat. The little girl sputtered, coughed up some water, and then inhaled. Her small chest rose and fell with life. "We need to call the police," David said, pulling out his phone. But Mary glanced down at the innocent baby's face, then looked up at the retreating tail lights of that expensive car. "And tell them what?" she asked. "That we saw a man throw his baby into a lake? Do you think they'll believe that? Especially if he's rich enough to drive a car like that?" David's expression darkened. He knew she had a point. In their small town, money always seemed to speak louder than truth. "Then what do we do?" he asked. Mary held the baby closer, her arms wrapped protectively around her. "We've been trying for 5 years to have a baby," she whispered. Maybe this is God answering us." "But Mary," David began, This is someone else's child. A child who would have died tonight if we hadn't been here." "Exactly," Mary cut in. "Someone wanted her dead. And if we report this, who knows what they'll do to her?" David stared at his wife's determined face, then looked again at the small miracle nestled in her arms. Slowly he nodded. "We'll have to leave town," he said gently. "Start over. Somewhere new." Tears welled in Mary's eyes, but she smiled. "We'll call her Hope," she said softly, "because that's what she is." 27 years later, Richard Miller's empire had grown even more powerful. He had eventually gotten the son he always wanted, though it had cost him his first wife. Sarah never recovered from the sudden infant death syndrome that Richard claimed had taken their daughter. The grief tore their marriage apart. Within 2 years, he'd remarried, a younger woman, and she gave him Robert, the son he'd longed for, his pride, his future. Now in his 60s, Richard sat in his grand office overlooking the city. Life had given him nearly, his wealth had more than doubled. He had all but forgotten that stormy night at Silver Lake. But elsewhere in the city, inside the chambers of newly appointed Judge Hope Walker, that night was about to return to confront him. Hope adjusted the collar of her black judicial robes as she reviewed the thick case file in front of her. She had earned this position through relentless hard work and a deep-rooted sense of justice, one that her adoptive parents, Mary and David, had nurtured in her from a young age. On her 18th birthday, they had finally told her the truth, how they had found her that night, how they had saved her life and raised her as their own. The news had shattered her world at first, but instead of letting it break her, Hope turned the shock into strength. She poured herself into her studies, driven by the mystery of her past and the hope of one day confronting it. She graduated at the top of her law school class and rose quickly through the judicial system. And now, as fate would have it, Richard Miller's case had landed on her desk. He was being sued by former employees for fraud, negligence, and dangerous work conditions. It was a headline-making lawsuit, one that few believed had any chance of succeeding against someone with Miller's money and influence. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Judge Walker, the Miller case is ready to begin," her assistant announced. Hope gave a subtle nod, though her heart was racing. Years earlier, she had quietly hired a private investigator to uncover the truth about her birth parents. What he found confirmed everything. Medical records proved her rare blood type matched both Sarah and Richard Miller. Security footage from the hospital showed Richard leaving with a newborn, the night before his daughter was declared dead. She had never brought formal charges. Instead, she waited, bided her time, for the moment when justice could be served not out of vengeance, but through the law. Now that moment had arrived. Richard Miller walked confidently into the courtroom, his tailored suit sharp and his stride sure. His presence commanded attention. He barely glanced at the judge's bench, already deep in conversation with his team of lawyers. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Hope Walker," the bailiff called. The room stood. Richard rose with the others, only now glancing toward the bench. His eyes fell on the young judge stepping into view. Something about her face made him pause, a trace of something familiar, a flicker he couldn't quite place. Hope sat down, her gaze locked directly on the man across the room. For the first time, their eyes met. And in that single, still moment, a chill crawled down Richard Miller's spine. "Mr. Miller," Hope began, her voice calm but clear. Her voice remained calm and professional. "Mr. Miller, I believe you'll soon find that this courtroom does not place wealth above justice." The trial went on, and Judge Hope Walker remained impeccably fair. She gave both the defense and prosecution equal room to present their arguments and ruled on objections with thoughtful precision. But each passing day seemed to rattle Richard more. Something about her steady, unshakable gaze unnerved him. On the 5th day, Judge Hope called a short recess and summoned both legal teams to the bench. "There is something I must disclose," she said evenly. "I considered stepping down from this case, but after careful review of the relevant legal precedents, I've concluded there's no conflict of interest that requires recusal." Richard's attorney looked puzzled. "Your Honor, may I ask, what exactly are you referring to?" Hope's eyes met Richard's directly. 27 years ago, Mr. Miller reported the death of his infant daughter. I now have reason to believe that report was untrue." Richard's face drained of color. "Is this some kind of sick prank?" "No prank, Mr. Miller," Hope answered, still composed. "I've submitted all the evidence to the district attorney. As of this morning, they've opened an investigation into charges, including attempted murder, child abandonment, and falsifying a death certificate." The entire courtroom froze. Richard sat still, staring at her, really seeing her, for the first time. Those eyes, Sarah's eyes. You, he stammered. "Yes," Hope said without emotion. "The daughter you threw into Silver Lake. The child you left to die because she wasn't the son you wanted." Richard's lawyer clutched his arm. "Say nothing else. We need to speak. Now." But Richard couldn't move. He couldn't look away from her. from those piercing blue eyes that mirrored the woman he had once loved and the baby he had tried to erase. "How did you survive?" he finally whispered. Hope's voice remained even. "A miracle. A couple saw what you did. They rescued me, raised me, and taught me that justice, no matter how long it takes, always catches up." The following weeks exploded into headlines across the nation.